This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Heather Sells. Protests are spreading across the country along with crackdowns on law and order. In Atlanta, 4 police officers are charged with aggravated assault after allegedly pulling protesters from a car over the weekend. In Washington, the president says he is ready to send in military troops if the nation's governors don't act to stop the violence. Dale Hurd has the latest on this escalating crisis.
Another night of looting and anarchy on American streets, but Donald Trump has pledged to stop it. Demonstrations against the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis while in police custody have turned violent across the country, with people breaking into businesses and stealing, smashing car windows and setting buildings on fire. Police officers were targeted. In St. Louis, 4 police officers were shot and another in Las Vegas. In Buffalo, New York, an SUV drove into a crowd of police. In Philadelphia, counter-protesters armed with golf clubs, baseball bats, and even hatchets faced off against rioters. And in California, business owners had to defend their property themselves. President Trump says he's mobilizing all civilian and military forces to end nationwide looting and property destruction, which he says are caused by outside agitators.
The biggest victims of the rioting are peace-loving citizens in our poorest communities. And as their president, I will fight to keep them safe. I will fight to protect you. I am your president of law and order.
And in an iconic moment, the president walked across Lafayette Park and held up a Bible outside historic St. John's Church, which was set on fire Sunday night. The move drew condemnation from some because police cleared Lafayette Park of protesters before the trip. The Episcopal bishop who oversees the church also criticized the president's action. Some Democratic governors are resisting the president's threat to deploy the U.S. military unless they dispatch National Guard to stop the violence. But President Trump could use something called the Insurrection Act to do it.
If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
In Minneapolis, at the site where George Floyd took his last breath, his brother Terrence demanded for the violence to stop.
Because that's not going to bring my brother back at all.
The results from 2 autopsies find Floyd's death was a homicide, but they differ on the cause. The county medical examiner says he died from a heart attack, complicated by being under restraint. But experts hired by Floyd's family said he died of asphyxiation from sustained pressure. In an effort to end racial violence, the One Race movement, a group of Christian pastors, held an outdoor press conference in Atlanta to bring a message of hope. Bishop Garland Hunt of the Father's House told CBN News the nation's pastors have to step in.
We just believe the church, particularly the pastors, have to come in as a group where we literally are reconciled, black and white, Asian, Hispanic. We are one, and we want to speak peace to our city. We want to speak love to our city.
Dale Hurd, CBN News.
And we're joined now by the Reverend Dean Nelson, the Executive Director of the Human Coalition and Chairman of the Douglas Leadership Institute. Reverend Nelson, you have worked on criminal justice reform, social justice issues for years. What do you think about the president saying he will deploy the U.S. military if states don't dispatch the National Guard?
Thanks, Heather, for the opportunity to be here. First of all, I want to say that our thoughts and prayers continue to go out for any of the victims who are wrestling with this very difficult time. And it's hard to watch that video from George Floyd, who was killed without concluding that his death was both tragic and the result of an evil act. To your question, I am proud that President Trump is taking a stand to protect these vulnerable communities. I'm glad that you played the entirety of what he shared, because a lot of people are trying to suggest that he's creating more of a problem. But in context, really, it is vulnerable populations, people whose businesses have been looted, torn down, that he's really looking to protect. And as a person who is, the leader of our nation, government's first principle is to protect. And I believe that he's taking the right action. Particularly, I believe he's frustrated when we see governors and mayors that are not taking some responsible action to protect the citizens within their cities and their states.
Well, I want to ask you about these protests because it's so tricky because, of course, people are advocating for justice at the same time. We're seeing criminal activity. We're seeing looting. What are your thoughts on these protests, and are they a good way to foster change?
Yeah, in the words of Frederick Douglass, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. I believe that it is important for Americans of good conscience to peacefully protest. My children were in Baltimore yesterday, peacefully protesting. I want to advocate for that. I think that when we see some of what's going on in some of our communities where people are looting, burning down buildings, stealing from others, I think that is absolutely the wrong thing that should be done. That's not the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. That's not the legacy of Frederick Douglass. And so we're calling on people, particularly leaders within communities, to take an aggressive stand against people doing that type of activity. I'd like to also state in many of these cities, we have seen firsthand where there are outside agitators that are coming in, and I've seen particularly African Americans in some of these communities fighting back against people who will come into those communities that are spray painting things, pretending as if it's Black Lives Matter, when in some cases it's not. So our commission and our encouragement to leaders within these communities is to protest, but to do it peacefully.
All right. Well, I know there are a lot of complicated and complex factors going on in and around these protests. Reverend Dean Nelson, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
The president is taking a lot of heat for his use of the Bible in a photo op last night. The evangelical columnist and former Bush speechwriter Michael Gerson called it sacrilegious, and D.C. pastor Duke Kwon tweeted, "God will not be mocked." Wheaton College's Dr. Ed Stetzer, the executive director of the Billy Graham Center, is speaking out against what the president did in a piece in Christianity Today. He joins us now. Dr. Stetzer, you're not generally known as a critic of the president. When you saw him holding the Bible last night, what did you think?
Well, I just think it was a very awkward moment. You know, he was asked by reporters, "Is that your Bible?" He said, "It is a Bible." I would have loved to see him open it and read the words therein that speak to justice and speak to peace and more. I think the clearing of the Lafayette Square was pretty stunning. I mean, you could actually hear the concussion in the Rose Garden, and then to walk over, hold up a Bible awkwardly. I just don't think that was the message that needed to be sent. And I think I agree with others like Ben Sass and others who have basically said using the Bible as a prop is not appropriate, and this was not helpful. We need a different kind of leadership.
Well, it seems that the president was trying to appeal to evangelicals by holding up the Bible. You mentioned Ben Sass, the senator, but what are you hearing from other evangelicals on this? Do you think this will help or hurt the president with that particular voter group?
You know, I've never been good at guessing that because the president has had awkward Bible moments on more than one occasion. What I would say is I have not seen a lot of the president's supporters coming out and saying this was a good idea. I imagine that when that group of people walked back to the White House, they might have turned to one another and says, well, that didn't go so well. I would just say that I think it's important for evangelical Christians. You know, I'm someone who believes that God supernaturally inspired through his Holy Spirit the Bible. It's inerrant and it's infallible. And to see it used for anything other than its intended purpose, to point to the good news of the gospel, to draw men and women to Christ, and then to help them to grow and be changed by that gospel, I think that's a misuse of the Bible. As a pastor, I would say to people in our church, don't put the Bible on your table. Don't put it on the top of your mantle by your fireplace as if it's some prop to say something. Don't display your righteousness before people like that. Instead, engage it. And I think right now we could have used some engagement of the Bible. I think the Bible's solutions could be a key part of what we're in the midst of this very broken and divided time.
Yeah, such a divided time. And I want to ask you about church reopenings because I know you work so heavily with pastors. What is your sense of how things are going with that effort right now? Do you feel like the progress makes sense, what you're seeing around the country?
You know, it's interesting because, our governor, Governor Pritzker, we created an open letter. We found his mandates to be too restrictive, and then he suddenly reversed course and turned them into guidelines. So I actually had a Zoom call with the area megachurch pastors in Chicagoland. And we're not rushing to reopen. We want to do so in a way, as you may know, Chicagoland has been hit harder. Dr. Birx just mentioned Chicago as one of the 3 hotspots. So I think pastors love people, just like their county health department loves people, just like governors, just like the president and the CDC love people. We don't want to put our people in harm's way. So we're working wisely and responsibly, following the science, helping our congregations to take those next steps. So I don't see that, in 2 weeks we're going to flip on. It's not going to be a grand opening. It's going to be a gradual reopening. And I think that's a wise course for people who love their community, they love their neighbors, and they love gathering and hearing the gospel shared.
Well, I know it's a difficult time for churches. Our church has got a reservation system, so I'm going to sign up. So a lot going on. But Dr. Stetzer, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Coming up, how COVID-19 has affected Cuba and what other issues the country is dealing with that make matters worse. But before we go to break, here's a look at what's trending on CBNNews.com.
Hey, if you're tired and exhausted all day, you can't think clearly, and you really just need a cup or even a pot of coffee to get through your day, then join me, Dr. Josh Axe, for this new series where I'm going to teach you how to transform your diet and use essential oils and supplements to get a better night's sleep.
Wake up to your best life. Call 1-800-700-7000 to get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
It's about the competition.
I kind of put that pressure on myself, and I think people had expectations.
It's about overcoming.
We use this phrase all the time, keep chopping, keep practicing hard.
It's about going the distance.
I think as a father, it's my job, to lead. Just be the best husband and father I can be.
Watch Going the Distance with Sean Brown Saturday night at 7:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Orphans Promise is committed to loving and serving at-risk children, to helping keep families together, and to creating opportunities for strong and sustainable communities around the world. We're working in over 60 countries around the world, and with your help, we can do even more. There's an old African proverb I love that says, if you want to run fast, run alone. But if you want to run far, run together. At Orphans Promise, we want to run far so we can touch the lives of as many orphaned and vulnerable children as possible. But we don't want to go alone. We're out to change the world, one child, one family, one community at a time. Will you join us?
More than 2,000 people on the island nation of Cuba have tested positive for COVID, according to the government. But human rights advocates believe there are more cases, and they are concerned about further erosion of human rights during this pandemic. The government did allow these graffiti artists access to downtown buildings in Havana, the capital of Cuba. They have been working on walls and rooftops to create images depicting daily life during the spread of COVID-19. This image coming up here with the boy with a bandana has the Spanish word coraje, or courage, in English above it. And Teo Babin is a longtime human rights advocate and CEO of Outreach Aid to the Americas. He recently wrote an op-ed for the Miami Herald on his concerns for Cuba, and he joins us now with more. Teo, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Heather, very much. Appreciate it.
You have followed human rights abuses in Cuba for years now, and one concern you have during this period is that the government is underreporting the number of cases. What do we know about that?
Well, what we know is that the government in March, when everyone else was protecting their people, the government of Cuba refused to do so, and in fact, did just the opposite. They wanted to encourage tourism. They were asking foreigners to come into the country. They even came up with the idea that perhaps the warm weather in Cuba would actually be an antivirus protection, and that and even if someone became ill, that they had a solution. They had a magical medicine that they could provide, that they were claiming that they had provided to China, and that they could help individuals get cured right away with this. So that they came up with this claims in order to try to delay the process, and of course it backfired on them. And now, as you mentioned earlier, there may be as many as 500,000 people in Cuba with the coronavirus.
Wow. You have also written about the government taking advantage of this time while the world is distracted to increase surveillance, exploit fear among the population. What are you seeing with respect to that?
Well, a civil rights defender conducted a survey in Cuba and found that 96% of the people that they surveyed reported that there was an increase in human rights violations in the country during the pandemic. It looks like what the government of Cuba is doing, as many other communist governments have done in the past, while the world is concentrating on an issue that affects everyone around the world, they want to take advantage of that and then increase their human rights violation. So now we're having reports of the Cuban government jailing some of the pastors that are providing assistance to people and the elderly, and charging them with such charges as spreading epidemics and illicit enrichment, ostensibly because of church activity, or lashing out at the faith community and taking advantage because they claim that they're illegally going about and doing things that they're not allowed to do. And in Cuba, of course, that's about anything. And so there's this harassment that's taking place against the religious community as a form of retaliation, pent up retaliation that the government had, because the Cuban pastors, leaders, the Christians had opposed a constitution that was recently passed that removed words, a lot of the safety net that the Christian community had on freedom of religion.
And just briefly, how can the U.S. help right now? What kind of leverage can the U.S. provide to influence the Cuban government for good in the area of human rights?
Well, some things we have already done. Recently, the State Department placed Cuba in a list of what they call a watch list of nations that violate religious freedom, and the U.S. Commission on Religious Freedom just placed Cuba in a special watch list called Violators of Religious Freedom Around the World. In addition to that, I think that it's very important that we don't neglect, that we don't forget, that we don't turn a blind eye to what the Cuban government is doing, so that more of this programs such as yours and the OPED and so forth is very important to keep the pressure on the Cuban government.
So much to be aware of. All right, Teo Bobbin, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you.
After the break, a look at a new CBN Films documentary on COVID-19 and how the virus spread across the world.
Daddy?
Yeah, buddy?
How many nickels are in a dollar?
There are 20 nickels in a dollar.
How do birds fly? Does milk really make my bones stronger?
Yeah.
Daddy, when we die, will we go to heaven?
Do you have the answer to life's biggest question? Call the 700 Club. We'll help you find answers to the important questions life brings your way.
Watch breaking news, in-depth exclusive stories and programs from health to entertainment you won't find anywhere else. The CBN News Channel, a perspective you can trust. Enjoy credible news reporting from around the world. Discover inspiring programs and stories of hope, all in one place from a Christian perspective. The CBN News Channel, a perspective you can trust. To watch the CBN News Channel, download the app or visit cbnnewschannel.com.
Hello, I'm Dr. David Perlmutter, board-certified neurologist and #1 New York Times bestselling author. Wouldn't it be great to boost your energy, eliminate brain fog, and even reverse brain disease? Well, you can, and I'm going to show you how, along with some of the world's most well-respected brain experts, in this DVD, Protect Your Brain.
Get Protect Your Brain, a free DVD only from the Christian Broadcasting Network, featuring experts on the cutting edge of neuroscience and brain health.
No matter how many times you've failed in the past, you really can do this.
In Protect Your Brain, you'll discover simple strategies to keep your brain young and healthy. Improve your memory. Discover the gut-brain connection. In Protect Your Brain. Get your free copy at cbn.com or call 1-800-700-7000.
If you want to improve the quality of your life, get the DVD Protect Your Brain and get it today.
The COVID-19 subject has faded from the headlines in many respects in the last few days, but many questions remain, including, did it really begin in a wet market in Wuhan, China, and how was it allowed to spread so far and so fast? Tonight, we'll air a CBN Films documentary on the recent history of COVID-19. It's called Outbreak. It will air on the CBN News Channel at 8:30, 9:30, and 11:30 tonight. It will also be shown Wednesday at 9:30 a.m. on the ABC Freeform channel. And joining us now is producer Wes Rickards with a preview. Wes, there is so much to talk about with this virus. How did you decide what to focus on?
You know, Heather, this virus is SARS coronavirus 2, and, you know, you and I both are aware of SARS coronavirus 1. That was the one that had devastated East Asia between 2002 and 2004. I believe that there were 8,000 cases, and of those infected, about 10% of them have died. You know, when there were reports in 2019 of a mysterious new pneumonia circulating around Wuhan, there were fears of a SARS-1 repeating itself, and I believe that the fears of that happening again was what led to a lot of the decisions that were made in the early days of this virus. And in an effort to quell the fears of that virus, it helped exacerbate the spread, and that's really what we wanted to focus on.
Well, it's so fascinating because, of course, we're still dealing with the virus, but we're already talking about the history of the virus and its origins, and that's what I think this documentary does such a good job with. In doing the research for it, what were some of the things you learned that surprised you?
You know, one of the things that I learned was the level of the cover-up. Some of the decisions that were made by the communist Chinese government in early January, I mean, they're frankly mind-boggling, and it's a big reason why the virus spread so far so fast. You know, another thing that I found to be chilling was that we were warned. And I'm not just talking about in December of 2019 when we had whistleblowers saying that there was another coronavirus on hand. I'm talking about for the last 15 years since SARS-1, there were people out there who said that we were at risk for another global pandemic. And unfortunately, we did very little to heed that warning.
Well, one of the takeaways that I got just from reading the script of this documentary is that people really need to be cautious about exposure to wild animals. So what do we know about animals and COVID-19 at this point in time?
All right, well, this is really important, okay? 70% of all viruses, not just talking about COVID-19, I'm talking about all viruses, will come from some sort of wildlife or exotic creature. You know, you go back to SARS-1, and what happened with that one was that the virus jumped from bats to an animal known as a civet cat, and then from civet cats, it went to humans. And the reason it went from civet cats to humans was that civets were being served in restaurants, I believe in the Guangdong province. You know, you're getting back into COVID-19, and it's a similar sort of chain that happened. You had bats, likely some intermediate animals such as a pangolin, before it jumped to humans. You know, there are questions about a possible exposure from a wet market or a corner where there were animals being sold in an exotic animal stall. even if not, the conditions at those exotic animal stalls, the conditions because of the wildlife trade, those are the necessary conditions, the ideal conditions necessary for a virus to jump from a host to a human.
All right, well, really fascinating, Wes, and so relevant for where we're at right now to understand how we got here. Thanks for producing this and your time right now.
Thank you so much, Heather. Appreciate it.
This outbreak documentary will air on the CBN News Channel, and that's tonight at 8:30, 9:30, 11:30, and also tomorrow morning on the ABC Freeform channel at 9:30 a.m. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after the break.
I am Region's first ROTC graduate student.
Meet the pastors who are preaching the gospel in a fresh, fearless way. I'm Roberto Torres-Cedillo. Join me each week for Next Gen Voices. And watch God transform a generation.
How'd you like to get a redo on your health, on your body, on your arteries, so you could have the energy you had 20 years ago? The great news is you can. I'm Dr. Mike Roizen, chair of the Wellness Institute at the Cleveland Clinic. I've written 4 New York Times bestsellers. But even better than having to read all that, you can listen to this DVD and watch it. Protect your heart? Yes, you can. Here's how.
Go to CBN.com or call 1-800-700-7000 for your free copy of Protect Your Heart. Let the medical experts show you their new discoveries on how to avoid heart disease and even reverse it. Easy steps to uncover the hidden dangers in your medicine cabinet, reduce stress, and get a complete do-over for your health. Call 1-800-700-7000. That's 1-800-700-7000. Or go to CBN.com to claim your free copy of Protect Your Heart.
Duck Dynasty's Sadie Robertson appeared on Fox Nation's Messages of Hope segment to offer encouragement to fellow Americans coping with the coronavirus pandemic. Robertson acknowledged that times are hard, but she said the beauty in this, if there is beauty in this, is that we are all going through it together. There's something really beautiful about knowing that even though we don't have control, we have a God who is a good Father who is in control of everything. And that is it for this edition of CBN News Watch. Please remember that you can find more of our news programs on the CBN News Channel anytime or online with cbnnews.com. And also, please tell us what you think about the stories that you have seen by emailing newswatch@cbn.com or talk to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hope that you will join us next time. Have a great day.